in store, the Makeshift Solas. So do check out, I won't plug them all now, but check out on the website the wonderful other things going on this weekend. So without further ado, come on in. Those at the back of the tent, come forward. There's room in the grass at the front. There's room. Come on in. Come in. Don't stand at the back. Good to have you. So what better way to get started than with the man who, in some senses, has become the voice of Solas, with storytelling, with Pádraig Ó Tuama pulling it together. Now, Pádraig, many of you will know him, but especially if you're a Solas faithful, a poet, theologian, with experience of conflict resolution as leader of the Corrymeela community in Northern Ireland. Described by Krista Tippett as an extraordinary person whose influence extends quietly and gracefully across the world. So over to you, Pádraig.
Thanks very much, Frank, and hello everybody. It's lovely to be with us in this Makeshift Solas Festival, but very sad, kind of in honor of all festival weather in Scotland that I've ever had so far. It's raining outside here. I'm on the Fermanagh-Donegal border. If you look over here, whenever I'm talking, you might see a hare bouncing around the place every now and then. The hares go back and forth here every night. There's 5 hares who live here in the garden. We have 3 great stories tonight. We'll just be with you for about half an hour. It is a little bit of an Irish takeover of Solas. So we have myself and then 3 others who are going to be telling stories, all very ecumenically minded, of course, and all very friendly to the Scots and the English and the Welsh. So we have brilliant stories tonight, all on different themes. And I'm thrilled to introduce you to some storytellers whose voice you'll enjoy thoroughly. Without further ado, we'll have our first story. I should tell you, 10 by 9, as it normally is a storytelling event that myself and my partner Paul Doran started about 9 years ago now, where 9 people have up to 10 minutes each to tell a true story from their life. We've run them at Solas Festival now for 4 or 5 years, and they're magnificent. We've had such amazing and brilliant stories. Some of those I think are up on our podcast, which I'll tell you a little bit about in between some of the stories. And we have events that are happening throughout lockdown as well. So, but without further ado, let's have our first story, and it is from the magnificent Helen McClements, who's coming to us from Belfast. So please give a lovely Zoom or Facebook Live Solas welcome to Helen McClements.
Hi, can everybody hear me? You all got me, yeah?
Yeah, that's
excellent.
Great.
Super. Well, I'll start then. So mine is all about trying to find your place whenever you're young and maybe a bit lost. So once when I was young, I had a dream that I would go to my upper 6th formal, svelte and glamorous, with a boyfriend in tow. For 7 years, this formal had been at the back of my mind. It was when you shrugged off the bright blue uniform and emerged radiant to show your peers and teachers that you were not just some nerdy teen. I was very disappointed that one of my very favourite teachers couldn't go because she was going to a Daniel O'Donnell concert that night. Most unfair, I thought, because everybody made an effort to go to this. Even those who hung around church all weekend in their Lee jeans from the factory shop in Newtonards and their Fruit of the Loom sweatshirts. Girls who never dressed up made a massive effort with glossy locks and shimmery lipstick. And of course, they all had boyfriends. I rarely had a boyfriend. And then, miracle of miracles, I managed to find myself a sort of boyfriend. He'd recently been dumped and needed a diversion, and I was anxious to fill that role because 1, he was a bit of a dish, and 2, it was Christmas and the formal was in February, and I just had to hold on to him until then. Formal fever took hold. We took the train to Belfast, going to Delaney's for lasagna and chips and sneaky bottles of Matthias Rosé. Trips to Belfast were a new thing, and they weren't something I did on a whim, lest I be blown up or shot. It was 1997, so that was still a very real possibility. If I mentioned going to Belfast, my grandmother would say, "Watch out for the bombs." In fairness, she had lived through not just the troubles but the Blitz, hiding under the kitchen table while the roof crumbled above her. She probably had PTSD. However, I was willing to risk a bomb if it meant getting a nice dress. In those days, few people spent hundreds on formal attires. We ogled dresses from Cook Eye and Monsoon, although Edens and Topshop were more of our price range. I bought a red satin dress in Principles for £35 with a coil neckline and spaghetti straps. Inevitably, another girl wore the same dress on the night, cheeky bitch, but we resolutely avoided each other. In the preceding weeks, I was in shocking humour as I tried to diet, ditching my after-school snack of 4 slices of white toast with real butter and homemade raspberry jam. Sometimes I had a slab of my grandmother's cake to finish. Oddly, when I avoided this, the weight dropped off and I didn't have to resort to laxatives. And then disaster struck. My date announced that he might not make it after all. Our formal was on a Wednesday and he worked in Dublin. Previously, it had felt like the height of sophistication, having a graphic designer sort of boyfriend who worked in Dublin, but that feeling dissipated when this news broke. Much to my embarrassment now, I recall asking if there were flights between Dublin and Belfast. That, I thought, would be quite James Bondish if he could jet in for the occasion. There weren't, but he made it with just enough time to look smug and self-satisfied in the photo, with the air of someone who was doing me a terrific favour, which, I suppose, in a way, he was. The actual event took place in the Culloden, which was probably the biggest disappointment of my life to date. We were served platefuls of dried up turkey, most of which the shape was scraped directly into the bin. The band was mediocre, and there was, to me anyway, a sense of acute letdown. The real anticlimax, however, was the after formal. The organising committee had, in an act of either madness or desperation, booked the Sea Cat for this, to sail from Belfast to Stranraer in Scotland. It was sold to us as an excellent option, as the bar was open all night. There was the promise of live music. God help anyone taking the journey for real that night. With about 100 kids in formal attire lurching about, either from excess drink or the rhythm of the waves. The live music was one disconsolate chap on a keyboard. His eyes bore an expression of utter defeat, as indeed they would if your career trajectory had led you here, playing Sweet Caroline to a bunch of pissed sixth formers. The janitor who had accompanied us, he was the school janitor who we had hooked up with another friend who didn't have a date, and he gave her the boot before we'd even set off from the Sea Cat terminal, and that meant that she spent the whole crossing to Scotland, there and back, crying inconsolably. Sort of boyfriend and I broke up shortly afterwards. Don't worry, said my mum, there will be other formals. I never want to hear about another bastard formal again, I replied. But 6 years later, there I was, this time as a teacher in Bloomfield Collegiate School in East Belfast. Back to North Down we went, this time at the Sandy Boy Lodge. I had an actual boyfriend this time. His name was Donal, but he was a doctor and he was up doing doctory things that night in Coleraine. I miss Donal. I wish he could have seen me there in my finery. But this formal was even more tedious than the first. It wasn't so much no crack as minus crack. It was a crack vacuum. I took to the drink and suddenly things seemed to improve. I bopped about a bit and metamorphosized into Miss McClements, who was the young, cool teacher giving it stacks on the dance floor. Of course, I took the shot a student offered. Ruby red in colour, it tasted innocuous enough until the Tabasco hit the back of my throat. The little shite. I retched and ran to the bathroom. If toilets could speak, this one would have rung the Samaritans. Up came the shot, the wine, and the dinner. My eyes were streaming, my throat was burning, and a small crowd had gathered outside the cubicle. "Are you okay, miss?" they asked, genuinely concerned. "Oh, I'm absolutely fine," I chirped, adopting the cadences of the locale as though this was going to detract from the state I was in. My dad had kindly agreed to pick me up with 2 other teachers when festivities were over. I rang home. "Can you come early?" I bleated. "I am most unwell." I hid in the toilets before attempting to emerge discreetly. I didn't manage that. My friends were in fine fettle by now, and nonplussed to hear that they had to leave. It was 10 p.m. "My dad will be here soon," I said. And there he was in his anorak, marching purposefully across the dance floor. Raging he was too. "Into the car," he said. I was a dishevelled mess. What am I going to tell Donal? I wept. Donal was a committed pioneer. He didn't get pissed at formals or anywhere else. "You say nothing," said my dad. "You're not a Catholic. You don't have to confess everything." I will urge my children, when the time comes, to avoid the whole formal pantomime. 9 years ago, however, I did squeeze into the same principal's gown and attend another formal in the Stormont, this with my husband. It too was shite. "I'm sorry for dragging you to this," I whispered as we left early to hit the Miracle on the Ormo Road. "Totally worth it to see you in that frock," he replied. I wish I could have shared that moment with 17-year-old me. She would have loved it. Thank you.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks so much, Ellen.
Okay.
Photographs nearby of these particular frocks that you can hold up to see?
I've just gone through 3 wardrobes trying to find them, and the children, I'd like to add, got dressed up in every other outfit, so that's why I was late to join, and still no dress. I do apologise.
That's fine. They do sound magnificent. And I suppose we should also issue, on behalf of the people of Ireland, a profound apology to the residents of Stranraer for that particular fateful night when 100 drunk young people from, what was it, Castlewell? Was it you were? No, that's where Fidelma is.
Yeah.
Anyway, 100 Irish people from Northern Ireland wandered across.
From Bangorian, drunk Bangorians.
Stranraer and everybody else in Scotland, we're very sorry for everything they did. I'm sure they're lovely now and all grown.
At least we didn't get off, or we just stayed there on the boat.
More to the workers on the line. So if anybody is interested in more magnificent stories from Helen, we'll tweet some out over the weekend on our 10 by 9 account. Helen's stories at 10 by 9. So thanks very much, Helen. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We have an Irish takeover of Solas with all these Irish stories. We also have a little bit of a Cork presence. So the next story is from my fellow Corkonian, Richard O'Leary. And so please give him a magnificent welcome and thanks in advance for his story. Richard O'Leary, everybody.
This story I've called, "Would You Like a Cup of Cha?" I have here a letter I received from the Embassy of the People's Republic of China. It's dated the 28th of August, 1987. Embassy of the People's Republic of China presents its compliments to the Department of Foreign Affairs of Ireland and has the honour to refer the scholarship offered to Mr. Richard O'Leary and agreed to admit him to the Beijing Languages Institute for the academic year 1987. On receiving this letter, I was very pleased that of all the applicants in 1987 seeking to emigrate from Ireland to China, the government had selected me. A month later, I was in Beijing at the Beijing Languages Institute. On arrival, I didn't know a single word of Chinese. I wrote the following letter to my mother. Mom kept all my letters. I wrote to her to tell her how I was getting on. 19th of October, 1987. Dear ma'am, I'm settling in reasonably well here. I find the food oily and spicy, but so far it hasn't adversely affected my stomach. This letter is written on rice paper, paper made of rice. I reckon that in Beijing, if it came to the worst and I got really hungry, I could eat my stationery. Whatever about the food, I had taken no chances with tea. When I'm traveling abroad, I can become stressed, and to calm me down, I rely on tea, preferably Barry's tea blend from Cork. I must have been the only foreigner who entered the country in 1987 who brought tea into China. However, 2 weeks later, in my residency in Beijing, my supply of Barry's tea was running low, and I realized I would have to learn quickly the Chinese language to be able to locate and purchase in Beijing a Barry's-like tea. Needless to say, I didn't tell my mom how difficult the change was to move from Ireland to China. I was more honest in the letter I wrote to my friend Terry. Dated 16th of October, 1987. Dear Terry, I am 7 hours ahead of you, so at 11:20 p.m. in Ireland, when you may be in your bed, I will have woken up at 6:20 a.m. in Beijing, interrupted by the sound of morning exercise, and at 7 a.m. by the radio news in Chinese over the public address system. Chinese language classes commence at 8 a.m. First, we have 2 hours of pronunciation. This involves repeating unfamiliar sounds, often with X, Q, or Z consonants, over and over again. I find it monotonous and difficult, especially because of my deep voice. The Chinese speak in high-pitched tones. Those Chinese high-pitched tones. This reminded me of an incident in Cork when I was a 10-year-old child. My teacher in primary school, Mr. Goggin, was preparing my whole class to sing in the school's singing competition. Mr. Goggin had us sing The Trout by Schubert. During the practice, he recorded our singing on a tape recorder. Then he played to us the recording. Mr. Goggin said, "There's something not quite right." So he replayed the tape of us singing. We could all hear that there was one low male voice out of tune. "It's you," said Mr. Goggin, pointing at me in front of the whole class. "You can't sing. You might be tone deaf." I have never been so embarrassed in my life. To make it worse, I wasn't even excused from the choir. I still had to go on stage at the City Hall in Cork. There I was with my classmates clustered around the microphone for the singing of Schubert's The Trout. They all sang, but I was instructed to mime. After that experience of tones, I was scarred for life. Now here I was in Beijing in 1987, and I discovered that Chinese language was a tonal language. I'd never even known languages could be tonal until I went to China. There are 4 tones in Mandarin Chinese. Take a Chinese word, for example, with the syllable ma. When you change a tone in which you say the ma sound, you change the meaning of the word. Depending on the tone of your voice, ma in a high-pitched tone, ma, can mean mother, and ma changed to a dipping tone, ma, can mean horse. We all need to be able to distinguish our mothers from a horse. My Chinese teacher at the Beijing Language Institute was called Teacher Chen. Teacher Chen didn't speak any English. If he had, I might have been able to tell him the history of me and changing tones. It was Teacher Chen who tried to teach me the 4 tones in the Chinese language. The first, the third, and fourth tones in Chinese I could manage, but I really struggled with the second tone, a sort of rising singing tone. Teacher Chen pointed to his mug of tea, and at the same time, he moved his arm in a rising motion and said, cha. This is a Chinese word for tea, and he used his rising arm to indicate that the sound is made in a rising singing tone, the dreaded second tone, not to be confused with cha in the high-pitched tone, which means fork. Hearing this, I feared that in China, when I'd ask for tea, the Chinese wouldn't know what I was trying to say, or worse, I'd be given a fork. I was on a government scholarship to study Chinese language. But what if it was impossible for me to learn Chinese? Maybe the government of the People's Republic of China had selected the wrong student from Ireland. How embarrassing would this be for me, for Ireland, and for the People's Republic? Then I realized I've heard this word cha before. In Cork, we use this same word, cha, to refer to tea. And in Cork, in our beloved Cork accent, we tend to speak in a lilting tone, a sort of sing-song. It's many a time I said to my own mother, would you like a cup of cha? For the first time since I arrived in China, I had a hope that maybe, just maybe, I could do this changing tones thing. So I went into a shop in Beijing and I took a deep breath and I said to myself, relax. Just pretend you're back in Cork and speak naturally in your best Cork accent. And so I said to the shop assistant, 同志, 你买不买茶? And it worked. The shop assistant gave me tea. She understood that I had said, comrade, do you sell tea? She did not hear, comrade, do you sell forks? I could speak Chinese. I could speak a tonal language. For the rest of the year, there was no stopping me. Soon, I was able to enjoy tea and a chat in Chinese with Teacher Chen. Back in Ireland, I have not yet attempted to join a choir.
Thanks very much, Richard. I always love hearing your stories. How long did you live in China for? Was it a full academic year?
Yeah, full year.
And how long before you braved out to get your bicycle license, trying to learn the language for that?
Second day, I realized if you didn't have a bicycle, you weren't going to go anywhere. So I had even less Chinese. And there's another story about how I was given a name in Chinese for my bicycle license.
Yes. Well, we'll send out a link to that over the weekend. That's magnificent. I always like hearing the Cork accent everywhere, really. My mum has such a strong Cork accent that people regularly think she's Welsh because of the strength and the brilliance of the Cork accent and the strength and the brilliance of the Welsh people. So we're all linked to each other. Thanks very much, Richard, for your story. Hope you're surviving well in lockdown. It looks like it's raining there, like it's raining here. So that's great. We there's 10x9s all over the place. There's one in Glasgow actually that meets in the Glad Cafe kind of on a quarterly basis. And so if you're interested in going along whenever lockdown lifts sometime in the future, if you're interested in going along to a 10x9 in there, you'll be able to go along. And if you look on Solas Festival over this weekend, you'll see links to some brilliant events. There's yoga happening tomorrow morning. On Sunday afternoon, I'm going to be interviewing the amazing Blue Rose Code, who I met at Solas a few years ago. We were both doing a thing on the Sunday morning event with Ricky Ross. And Blue Rose Code, Ross Wilson, was singing. And we just had a connection and we've stayed in touch. I've gone to see him play a few times. And he has an amazing new album coming out next month. So I thought we'd have a bit of a chat. He's stolen the title. He's stolen a line from one of my poems to use as the title of the of his new album. And he's going to sing 4 or 5 songs from that beautiful new album. I listened to it today, and then we're going to talk too. He's famously reluctant to talk about the lyrics of his songs. He's like Leonard Cohen in that way, not interested in telling us what they mean. He's interested in hearing what we think they mean. And so it'll be a lovely event. And then there's all kinds of other events happening too over the weekend that are all going to be streamed live on Facebook and on the Solas site. So have a look there. I'm sure we can put up the link in the chat or put it out via Facebook or different things like that, all the events that are happening. So that'll be great. We just wanted to have a short engagement with some stories to begin the festival. And we're going to finish off with a story now, with great thanks to everybody for tuning in. Great thanks to the Solas Festival for 11 years of absolute brilliance. And we're looking forward to 11 more and many, many more of the Solas Festival. It's a wonderful highlight of the year. I always love being there. And so thank you to everybody involved in the Solas Festival, from the organizers to the people who work behind the scenes, to all the technical people, to all the volunteers. It's a magnificent festival, a real highlight. And it's a great place where art and artists, as well as the ethical consideration of artists, come together to consider what does it mean to have a festival of art, and to consider the messages of art as they're applicable to policy, to inclusion, to immigration, to politics, and to shared life together. I love it. It's a wonderful festival. So our final story is going to be coming from Fidel McCarlin. So please give a lovely, warm Solas Festival welcome to Fidel McCarlin.
Thanks, Pádraig. The story I'm going to tell, I first told at a Unison event where we were doing, it was an event to share LGBTQ history with, I suppose, so some of those of us who are older as activists, with some of the younger activists who are coming up. And there's a fantastic crop of particularly young, trans, queer, non-binary activists that are coming up through the scene in Northern Ireland, which is fantastic. So it was in that context that I told the story, really just to, I suppose, talk about some of the days gone by. Can I watch you and your girlfriend have sex? The RUC recruit asked me. Can you not afford a porn video? I responded. He was the shade of a tomato, and some of the other men in the room were no doubt trying not to snigger, particularly the one who wrote the question, which had just been pulled out from an upturned green RUC hat. It was the mid-1990s. I was in my mid-20s. Because I'm a lesbian, at that time, I could be fired from my job, be refused service in a shop or a pub, be evicted from rented accommodation, and my relationship wasn't legally recognised. I was in a room in Garnival Police Training Centre with about 30 RUC trainees. There was only one woman in that cohort. The rest identified themselves as lads whose father and grandfather served, former reserves and English-based police officers or soldiers who realised how much better the pay was in Northern Ireland and reckoned it was worth the risk of being shot or blown up. A few of my nationalist friends were critical of me having anything to do with the RUC, but I reasoned. They were training to serve the public, and we are members of the public, and besides, they were paying me. It made me feel like a professional lesbian. This wasn't the first training session I had delivered to the RUC recruits, and this was the final exercise we did each time. Ask us a question, write it down and put it into a hat. Whatever you have ever wanted to ask a gay person. We've probably heard it before, we told them. Each recruit would then pick a question from the hat and read it out loud. Do you think you're going to hell? How did your parents react when you told them you were gay? Is it true that gay men become incontinent because of gay sex? Why are gay men so promiscuous? Well, I said, if a straight man could meet a woman, didn't have to have any clever chat-up lines, buy her a drink or dinner, or even talk to her and get sex, would you have more sex? There were generally nods all round and even a look of envy. But why do gay men have sex in public toilets? This was one of the reasons for the training. There have been a number of instances where there have been complaints about men hanging out in public toilets. The commander would set up some surveillance and organise a sting, resulting in the arrest of men who were often married or worked as local teachers, solicitors, businessmen, and even police officers. There had been a few suicides of those arrested before the court case came up, as they knew that their name, age, occupation would get printed in the local paper, and they would have to declare a sexual offences conviction on every future job application for the rest of their life. We argued that visible surveillance, increased lighting, and giving advice and warning would be enough to dissuade the use of the toilets that way. And besides, once a sting happened, word got out, and there was an increase in the number of people that used them because they reckoned it would be safe for a while. The first exercise we did was to get the recruits to identify all of the issues in their lives, which are now different because of their decision to join the police, as well as the obvious one of being shot or blown up. They told us they had to live in certain areas. They could only socialise in particular bars. They had to lie about what they did, who they were, where they went. Some of their children thought they were postmen. A few Catholics had been disowned by their families. There were high rates of alcoholism because of the stress. We wanted to get them on side. We wanted them to recognise that often people in society saw their uniform and in the same way saw our sexuality and felt free to judge without getting to know any of us personally. Fast forward about 6 months. I had joined the Belfast chapter of the Lesbian Avengers, which had just been set up by a visiting New York City dyke, Amaya Geldman. The first thing about the Lesbian Avengers is that there are no minutes needed. I was already on the committee of the Lesbian Sexual Health Project, the not yet existing Lesbian and Gay Centre, Belfast Pride, NUS, USI, L&G Group, as well as Lesbians Organising Lesbian Activism. And there were a lot of meetings and a lot of minutes. So a group that had meetings with no minute taking was very attractive. So the Lesbian Avengers were formed in September 1992 in New York. And the following month, a black, lesbian and white gay man were killed when their house in Oregon was firebombed by people supporting Ballot Measure 9, which was a piece of legislation being introduced which would classify homosexuality as abnormal, wrong, unnatural and perverse. The Lesbian Avengers had joined the protests of the murders and as a symbolic act, fire ate to remember how Hattie Mae Cohen and Brian Mock died. So from then on, fire eating became an act of defiance and commemoration associated with the Lesbian Avengers. So we were all very excited when one of the first things we were going to do was learn how to fire eat. We all met in the Parliament bar, coincidentally beside the fire extinguisher, and had a quick health and safety brief, which was, avoid fizzy drinks or beer, as burping with the taste of fuel in your mouth is quite unpleasant. Burping with the lit flame in your mouth would definitely set up the sprinkler system, and tilt your head back, well back. We each had a torch, and I'm not even sure what it was made from. I think cotton wrapped around a coat hanger, and we practiced putting it in and out of our mouths unlit. I suspect we looked like a group of women who were taking oral hygiene to extreme levels. When you're at the dentist and he or she says open wide, and you think you've opened it as wide as you can, well, I found out you can open it wider when there's a burning cotton rag heading for your tonsils. So as we lined up, we dipped the cotton rags in the lighter fuel and lit them. The flickering blue flame and the accompanying smoke had me glancing nervously towards the fire extinguisher. Amaya went first and showed us a few times. She made it look easy and cool. I really, really wanted to be that cool. So when it came to my turn, I was nervous but determined. I put my head so far back I could see the wall behind. The torch was lit. I put it towards my mouth and thought, don't breathe in. The smoke hit my nostrils before the fire hit my lips. I held my breath. The fire went in. I was supposed to close my mouth briefly to extinguish the flame. Instead, I coughed, sending the flame outwards, leaving a horrible taste of lighter fuel in my mouth and a singeing smell, which may have been my nostril hair. Thank goodness I didn't have a beard, but I had failed the cool test. So when the next task was presented, I was determined to regain some space. Abseiling down a building was suggested, but we settled on some after-dark graffitiing the following Tuesday. We were going to break the law. We could be done for breaching Section 1 of the Criminal Damages 1971 Act, and we had the name of a solicitor in case we got caught. In the space of 6 months, I had gone from supporting the Royal Ulster Constabulary to becoming a lawbreaker. I arrived in black jeans, black DMs, and a black polo neck, and a beanie hat. I looked every bit the stereotypical burglar or 1980s art student. We had our black spray paint and split up into pairs, and off we went into the night. Some of the Avengers brought along stenciled cutouts of clenched fists and the words, Dyke Power. Myself and Katrine, we headed off and get into our first blank wall, which was the archway beside the Duke of York. We pondered what to write that would be radical, promote lesbian visibility, and would make a statement. So I kept watch as Katrine spray painted, lesbians are everywhere. When it was my turn, I spray painted, lesbians are lovely. We spent an hour or so slinking into the shadows, adorning grey walls with our messages of loveliness, or so we thought. And about 3 weeks later, an article appeared in one of the local newspapers. Here is the article headline, which I cut out at the time. DJ gets death threats from angry lesbians. The article reads, a top Belfast DJ, is locking his doors and bolting the windows after he received a death threat from lesbians. Ellis Records boss and well-known DJ Philip Patrick got a jiffy bag in the post this week with an ominous warning, "You are going to die," pasted onto a recent newspaper photograph of himself, which I would like to qualify, we had nothing to do with. The newspaper piece continued. It is the latest and most serious threat against Patrick, who is accusing militant lesbians for sending the handwritten letter. And he is also blaming them for writing cryptic messages, "Lesbians are watching you," on the gable wall close to his business premises in Queen Street. He said other slogans such as "Dyke Power" had appeared in other parts of the city where he passed each morning coming to work. "I know these are targeted at me, but if they're meant to intimidate me, they're wasting their time," he said. He believed he's been singled out for special attention by militant lesbians because he was once accused of dubbing the word dyke on a greeting card to a woman. The police are investigating the matter. So, our graffiti to increase visibility instead scared the bejesus out of one straight man whose actions brought the Joseph Heller catch-22 quote to mind. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Padama. I think it's magnificent that you have props, just like Richard had props too.
Yeah, I think props are important. Richard sets the standard that the rest of it can only watch in amazement. But we do our best.
Was that a headline from 1988 then?
No, it was about 1995 in the Sunday World, that bastion of current affairs.
90s with your law-breaking militant lesbianism. So we love hearing stories from times that we've come to Solas. We have a few recordings from Solas Festival 10x9 events over the last couple of years. We'll tweet them out over the weekend so that you can follow along. I'm sure Solas Festival will retweet those or put them up on Facebook as well. So just follow along the Solas Festival social medias, and they will be sending out other stories that we've heard from other people over Solas Festival 10x9 storytelling events over the last few years. We've come to the end of our 3 stories. This is just the first event, the whole weekend of Solas Festival in lockdown that's being broadcast from Facebook Live as well as from the Solas Festival website. So head on there to look for some other events. There's some happening tomorrow and some happening on Sunday. And continue to send love to the committee and everybody that works for Solas, everybody that volunteers, everybody that donates to Solas. It's a magnificent festival, and we look forward to being back together with you in a field in Scotland next year. And I want to thank very much Helen McClements and Richard O'Leary and Fidel McCarlin for their great stories. Thank everybody involved in Solas. And you can catch up with loads of 10x9 stories on the podcast, which we'll tweet links out to.